everyone, welcome back to Beyond the Veil Tarot and Astrology. My name is Candice Marie. Thanks for joining me. Hope you guys are doing well. Back at it with a video, little different. Found that I had some time in between some major astrological happenings in this next week and wanted to just start working through my list of requested videos. A number of people have been asking me for the last few months actually to take a look at the Pluto return for the United States. As many of you guys may or may not know, we just recently in December completed the Pluto return. By exact terms, we're still going to see it kind of in action until 2024. But this is really the first time that I've had time to kind of sit down and really take a look at some of the significant aspects in the United States chart. So I wanted to touch on that, and I have a list of things that I'm kind of working off of that just kind of caught my eye. So it's not purely just the Pluto return. We're also going to be talking about the fact that the US has also had 3 separate Mars returns. We still have the third one that's going to be approaching here in the spring. We're also going to take a look at Saturn in conjunction to the US moon in Aquarius, the nodal square, which is going to really reinforce America's Pluto return later this summer. And also we have our Jupiter conjunct Chiron, which is really going to be activating the United States chart. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to be going on. I'm just going to kind of work through this list and give you guys my hot takes on some stuff that's going on. If you guys have seen my videos in the past, I've said this previously and not a lot of people know, but kind of got my start by making world and political predictions using astrology. So back in the day, I did some work with Astrology actually, and made quite a few videos talking about the US election before Trump was elected. Something that I like to do is I like to take a look at the inauguration chart before the new president comes in, talk about what the next 4 years is going to look like. And if you guys go back and if you look at those videos, me talking about Trump and also me talking about the US approaching the Pluto return point, the transits that I was seeing coming in 2020, not to toot my own horn, but everything's been pretty bang on. So if you guys want to go back and look at that, you can, but I'm going to do something similar just by kind of talking to you about the transits and some things that I think are rather important. Okay, so as I go through this, I'll draw on some stuff and I'll show you guys where I'm getting some of these predictions from. We'll filter in and out of a couple different return charts. I always use the July 4th, 1776, the Sybil chart in Philadelphia, right? So there's a wide debate about which chart is the one to use for predictions. I know there's 2, maybe 3 significant charts that astrologers use. This is just the one that I like to use. So obviously always is going to give us that sun in Cancer, the Sagittarius rising, and the moon in Aquarius. So taking a look at the Pluto return dates, those of you guys who are alive and breathing, right? You're not ever going to have a Pluto return unless you're a vampire. So that's not a thing because of just the way that Pluto orbits. It's the furthest planet in our solar system. So every 270 odd years, we're going to see this Pluto return. So when you hear the Pluto return, generally it's in reference to something that's going on with a country. And we see throughout these transits that there is rises and falls of empires when we see these Pluto returns happen. So very similar, we're going to see something similar to the US Revolution, the French Revolution, because Pluto is now kind of coming into this new phase. So the dates that we had the Pluto returns because of the retrograde periods were in February 20th, 2022. So that was the first hit that it had. Then we had July 11th, 2022. That was the retrograde. And recently we had Pluto, which went direct and began moving forward again and reactivated this 27 degrees of Capricorn, okay? So the US chart in general, if we really take a look at what the essence of that Pluto is, really it reflects on history, right? The Declaration of Independence, being able to really focus more on independence from other countries, focusing also on anything in regards to taxes, freedom when it comes to money, enterprise, all of that stuff, right? That's really kind of what kicked a lot of that stuff off. Taxation without representation, kind of eerily similar to what's going on right now. I think a lot of us are kind of questioning and wondering, exactly where are our tax dollars going? Why are we paying taxes? Why are millionaires and billionaires paying next to nothing? Why are corporate companies getting all of these tax write-offs? Like, what the heck is going on? Very, very Pluto and Capricorn in the second house. So now, right, almost 300 years later, we don't have a king, but some would argue that there are ruling bodies outside of our political figures that are dictating what's going on with the money in America. So that's like the Pluto return, I think, in a nutshell. Now, specifically, Pluto in the second house, if we were to analyze this like a natal chart, can be an indication of wealth, right? It's retrograde, so it doesn't always mean that it's excessive wealth. Not everybody who has Pluto in the second house is going to have excessive wealth, but opportunity for wealth and accumulation of such. And wealth is defined in a variation of different ways, but the second house can be material goods because it is traditionally an earth house. It has connections with Taurus. But Pluto in Capricorn, we've seen, especially throughout this last, since 2008 period, has really been about a total change and transformation of power. And it's fair to say it's been kind of like when the switch flipped and we started seeing probably much more of an increase in lobbying, right? Especially in regards to big pharma, anything in regards to big tech, and just the relationship that certain people within the US system who are serving the citizens, working for Congress, working for Senate, working as the president, whatever, it is being bought, so to say. I think that's pretty fair. Now, Pluto in the second house at 27 degrees talks about the change and the transformation on a very physical level, not just of power, but of words, spoken words, communication, right? The US pretty much proclaimed through the Declaration of Independence, we're peace out, we're out of here, we're not doing this anymore, and this is how we're going about being able to ensure that there is a whole series of rights that are going to be upheld, and also checks and balances that ensure that this does not happen again. So there's no coincidence over the last 2 years, there's been a lot of talk about free speech. What is free speech? Is it being limited or controlled, right? This is in a Saturn-based sign by older structures, okay? So it usually isn't until the later part of a Pluto transit, which is round about 20-ish years, okay? Depending on his retrograde, it can be 18, it can be all the way up to in the late 20s. We start to really see the effects of what has Pluto provided us. And Pluto will be going into Aquarius next year. It's going to do a do-si-do before it really fully stays in Aquarius in 2024. But for right now, I think it's really interesting to kind of reflect on this and kind of go, wow, where do we realize that Gemini-related things, right? So if you're into step astrology, degree astrology, 27 is about Gemini-related things. So it's media, it's commercials, right? It's documents, paperwork. It can be about communication, the narrative that's being put out there specifically. When it comes to money and power and control, and also what's at our fingertips. So it's also the money behind what's in our hands, our cell phones, right? People paying to be able to see our information and our data, that what we're doing is definitely valuable because they can spy on Pluto and see what we're looking at, what we're buying, what we're talking about. Also, I think it's going to bring up a lot of stuff in regards to just how much information, how much access do they have when it comes to looking into our search history, our phones, what Alexa is listening to, what your iWatch is picking up. I mean, a lot of this stuff sounds crazy, but not so much, and you'll see so in over the next couple of months. Now, like I said, Pluto has had its retrograde. It actually had its final Pluto return, because in a return, you'll see a series of several before something goes direct and it returns to that degree. And that was on December 28th, 2022. So I'm going to show you guys that chart before we even get into some of the other aspects. All right, so let's do the return chart. And that was for December 28th. So this is that chart. So you can do a return chart for any planet except for the sun and the moon, right? Those don't retrograde. Those are always going forward. And this is going to show us more or less what's the theme of the Pluto return. Now, Unlike a lunar return, which is working within 30 days-ish, or a solar return, which is working within about a year, you can look at those returns and go, okay, I can expect these things over the next 28 to 30 days or the next, 365 days. The Pluto return, not as much, right? Because it's such a long return. If you guys saw that particular return box, I don't know if you saw that, you'll see it, that pops up. The next return that we're gonna have, the next Pluto return, will not be until February 24th, 2268. That's a mouthful. We're not gonna be around, right? I don't think the United States is gonna be around, to be honest with you. That's just my 2 cents. So just goes to show you, like, through this return, the return means that the planet's coming back to its true essence. So it's coming back to what it promised within the natal chart, but it's not really a natal chart. It's just more kind of like not even, I guess, technically an election or an event chart. So this is the return. So this is going to play out really until we have that next return. So for over the next 250 odd years, this is what Pluto is going to be bringing up. So if we look at what's happened in US history since we had the American Revolution, the Founding Fathers, Civil War, right? World War I, World War II, a Great Depression, definitely a huge dramatic shift in the last 100 years, especially in regards to money, resources, tech, you name it. I mean, America is just completely different. However, what's really interesting is when you think about how young America is, and how really the natal chart of America, in my opinion, is so fascinating. And it really does mirror kind of like the personality of the country as a whole, that Aquarius moon, the sad rising. It's very like, hold my beer, go big or go home. All that Cancer, which is very much about the pride of the homeland, but it's all kind of hanging out in the 8th house. So it also talks about like that fear of protecting ourselves and other people, and can be kind of combative with Mars in the 7th. We're seeing now, as we have this second Pluto return, there is going to be this complete reevaluation of what needs to die off, what we need to let go of, what needs to change, and what new power, new resources, new money, potentially even like political structures, all of that stuff is kind of being reborn. I'll talk more about that when we look at the natal. So let's look at the Pluto return chart, and just know that just because the Pluto return is over, it doesn't necessarily mean these changes are really going to be implemented in the immediate next couple months or next couple years. Many of us may not fully see the results of this for 2 or 3 years, 2 or 3 generations into the future. So we're not going to see it. Other people might see it. You will see sparkles of it. And I think that'll be closer to the Uranus return and some other transits. But I'll give you guys some important timelines that you may start to see some of this unfold. Okay, kind of moving on. So this is the Pluto return. So it happened December 28th, 2022. It gives us 23 degrees Aquarius rising, which I kind of chuckled when I saw, because I was like, of course. You'll see a lot of similarities when I compare these charts to the natal chart. Aquarius 23, right? That's an Aquarian degree, which is about a revolution, a change, something that speeds up. It not necessarily transforms, but it goes into the future. It rebels. So it's a very kind of Uranian degree, which is cool that it's in the same degree as its association with the ascendant. So Aquarius risings traditionally are seen as like going against the grain, needing freedom, wanting to question the status quo, wanting to do something that's very abstract or kind of out there. Now, this particular sign is traditionally, not modern, traditionally ruled by Saturn. So you've got an Aquarius rising chart with Saturn sitting just behind, right, the ascendant. So I use Placidus, that's just my go-to, to each their own, but I think that that's really telling because Saturn's sitting at 22, which is more of like a Capricorn degree. So it does talk about government and political figures and older structures and big business, anything like that. And it is the ruler, if this is an Aquarius rising, of the 12th house, which is hidden and subconscious. In this chart, it also has affiliations also with the 11th house, which I would see more as like politics and particular parties or political figures. So to see this chart, this is just my method, I immediately want to look at the chart ruler and its aspects. So we're going to look at Saturn, okay, then we're going to look at Uranus. Saturn being in the 12th house makes me feel like the 12th house is where things go to get, I guess, to get lost. They go to set, right? Because this is as we're coming into the first house, or I guess you would say rising. So it's going to be rising in a new beginning. I see the 12th house almost like the shadow. Okay. So if you guys get where I'm going with this, Capricorn in the 12th house, Saturn is in the 12th house, shadow government, people who are pulling the strings behind, you know, the curtain, things that we don't see. Some would argue that's already happening, but this may actually be something that becomes like really a thing where we don't really know, or we're not seeing, or there is some kind of connection with global governments, because the 12th house can talk about foreign lands and places overseas. So does this suggest that there is some type of infiltration of the government that happens as a result of like a larger new one world government, one world order that starts to come in? Maybe. It's at 22, so it makes me feel like it's not necessarily so much about outer control. It can very much be about other countries that start either infiltrating, I hate to use that word, infiltrating our government, and we start to kind of have concerns that we may not even realize that this is happening. Some people are already saying this is going on, but that's just kind of my hot take, that there's other countries that are infiltrating our particular way of being able to manage and run things. But once again, it's in the 12th house, so we would never know. Now, Saturn conjunct the ascendant also has a much more serious, kind of gaunt, limited, kind of gloomy type of demeanor. I love you guys who are Saturn rising people, or if you have Saturn on the ascendant, if you're going through that transit, you know that there is a sense of growing up that comes with that, right? So growing up, feeling more serious, focusing more on goals, cutting back, limiting things. And Aquarius is the people, right? It is the people. So the fact that we have this on the ascendant makes me wonder, is this a situation where after a period of seeing this Pluto return happening, and then also waiting until Pluto is getting round about this, dare I say, 22 to 26 degrees of Aquarius, is that when things get interesting? I do think so. That's not gonna be for a while, right? But that's also gonna be America's moon. I know America's moon is somewhere right around here. I'll show you guys the chart in a second. Then the other thing that we would look at also is by sign, right? It's an 11-degree square. So it's not enough to be considered like a hard enough square or a hard enough angle, but by sign, Saturn is squaring the south node, and it's also squaring the north node, which does kind of represent the need to integrate more Saturn-based things in order to kind of clear the decks and release ourselves from the past, and in order to go further into the future and have more stability moving forward. Now, just textbook, right? Having looked at the Pluto return chart, we know that that is about America totally changing and transforming their money, resources, the US dollar, the most widely traded currency. Everything is kind of compared to dollars around the world. And we look at this and I start to wonder if the Pluto return is about America realizing, oh, shift is about to hit the fan. There is a need to really protect our resources, protect our assets. Is it going to be about the US making a conscious change and a transformation when it comes to spending money? Like, I think of the budget. I think of also taxes. I think of just like the future of what they're talking about with like cryptocurrency and CBDC and, the Fed, which would be Capricorn, getting involved and being like, look, this is not sustainable, the rate that things are going. Is it important for us to start researching and looking into being able to create a US coin or a digital dollar? Are we getting on board also with the central banks? Banking is the second house. So there's something changing and transforming about that. But the darker side of Pluto is the corruption. And so I think that really what this is all about is like realizing that the banks are getting richer. The US government is also making a ton of money off of Pluto related things, death, fear, war, right? Anything in regards to that stuff. And where all of that is just coming home to roost and it's becoming a little bit more visible. So if you think back to what happened with US Revolution, while we made the decision to kind of leave that partnership within the United Kingdom, it was as a result of feeling like we were being manipulated and they were just sucking us dry of our resources. So there's something kind of similar that's going on right now. All right, so we look at now Uranus being kind of the co-ruler of this chart, and Uranus is in Taurus, where it's not as comfortable. It's not totally thrilled being there because Taurus wants slow and steady. It doesn't want any chaos. It wants to know it has food and resources and shelter. And as Uranus tears through Taurus, we see that there's a lot of instability in these things. So after 2 years of Saturn-Uranus squares, now finally we start to see Saturn moving forward and kind of breaking, but still it's within 7 degrees. So in the same way that I was like, look, Saturn square the nodes, is it's time to get serious about limitations or growth in terms of maturity. Kind of some similar stuff. Saturn square Uranus is basically saying you've got the old way of ruling things, right? People who have been making decisions either globally or behind the scenes and kind of dictating what the future is going to look like in America. And then you've got this revolution that's brewing with the North Node and Uranus in close proximity. And technically Uranus is in the 3rd house in this. So Saturn is restriction, right? Uranus in the 3rd house of movement, moving around, cars, requiring, to show new ID. I think this new push for the new ID or potential even digital IDs or anything in regards to documentation, getting around in your neighborhood. I definitely think that Saturn is saying there's going to be a much more limited way of being able to communicate, move, learn, connect with other people. Like there's a limitation. And this is an opening square, which basically means that this is kind of saying, okay, what are you going to do about it, right? Are you not liking the area that you're living in? Are you going to move to a new state, or are you going to move to a new county or city? What are you going to do about feeling limited? Are you going to make the decision that you're going to go and be a keyboard warrior with Uranus in the 3rd house and start talking to people online and telling people what's going on? This is still in a financial sign. So it definitely deals with through the limitation. How are people talking about, hey, I need more food, I need better resources, I need to get into a community that's going to be, sharing and expanding and growing, because that's all what Taurus is about. So it does talk about kind of this wrangling of communication, or at least being able to feel like you can move around or connect with other people freely, especially when it comes to resources. This is also about groups of people, right? Uranus is about groups of people. So where the politicians or where those in power, Saturn, are being challenged by farmers, by artists, by creatives, by travelers, all of that stuff. So quite interesting, that aspect. The second thing I would look at then would be the moon. So the moon having its placement in the sign of Pisces, it's hanging out here at an 18 degree. So this is going to be a more challenging degree because 18 does deal with anything in regards to health, especially 18 of Pisces. I think of like hospitals. In this chart though, it talks about the masses. It talks about like the collective. So this is like all of the Americans in general being referenced in this chart, the moon. So the moon in Pisces, dreamy, creative, optimistic, kind of spiritual, and it's coming into close conjunction with Neptune. Now notice in this chart, and this is where some whole sign people are like, I don't care for Placidus. I understand. Pisces here is intercepted, okay? So this is what happens when you use Placidus in some situations. You're gonna have a sign that's gonna get swallowed up by a house. So if this was an Aquarius whole sign rising, the moon and Neptune would be in the 2nd house, which it'll have some similar themes. It's gonna be talking about, not observing or feeling desperate or feeling in need or feeling lost when it comes to resources, and emotionally, possibly also feeling drained. Moon and Neptune has really positive psychic connections, but in this, I'm wondering, in the 2nd house whole sign, it can talk about like land. And I think this is going to talk more about homelessness, Moon, Neptune, not knowing the roots, not knowing where we come from, not knowing the past. I feel like this is definitely going to materialize as we move forward, potentially on the potential of losing our history, right? We already know that in a lot of ways in the school system right now, it's like You know, kids aren't saying the Pledge of Allegiance. We're not being told the complete truth about the founding of the country. A lot of people don't understand the background of what went on coming to the United States. They're just like, oh, Thanksgiving. They don't understand the impact that it had coming here on natives in you know, North America, right? They also they've learned about slavery, but they don't really know the impact of slavery. You know what I'm saying? So there's this sense of like missing out on not just the roots and the history and the legacy, but also like people who are being forgotten, and us not being able to talk about how or why, or the history of how this country was founded. Others would argue that this conjunction may also allude to masses of people getting sick, masses of people being depressed, potentially being also very concerned because the moon is about what is changing the most. And in this chart, the moon rules children, and it also rules health and wellness and anything in regards to routines. So issues revolving around reproduction, women's reproduction, women having health-related issues, a mental health epidemic, issues in regards also to pharmaceuticals and resources, or drinking water. I mean, the list can go on. So in this chart, though, aside from that conjunction, which is where I'm getting a lot of these terms from, some of the aspects that the moon is making isn't entirely all that bad. We see that the moon is in a sextile to Mercury and Pluto. So the behind the scenes, whoever, whatever is pulling the strings or is in charge, is sextiling the moon Neptune. So it's like, as much as I hate to say this, people who are going, yeah, what if we like, you know, disrupted a water supply, or what if we messed with the food, or what if we created a shortage? Because the sextile is saying it can do that. And Mercury and Pluto in conjunction, once again, Mercury is intercepted, Pisces is intercepted, because both Virgo and Pisces are the two signs that are missing. When you look at interceptions in a chart, it basically means that it's like a blind spot. It doesn't mean you can't use it. It just means that when you become aware of the fact that something is missing, or there's not a lot of clarity, or that you need to really focus on that, then you can integrate it and it becomes easier to use. But even by using the whole sign method, you're going to see that this particular conjunction of Pluto and Mercury conjunct, which I think in the 12th house is kind of like diabolical. Personally, I do. I don't think it's great, because it is, you know, 12 houses to Saturn on the ascendant, that this doomy and gloomy future is being fabricated and being set up behind the scenes to affect the masses in regards to their emotions, the moon, the second house, their resources, what they consume, food and water. In the second house would be Neptune and the moon. Nourishment can be seen as the moon. Yeah, it's just, it does not make me feel good. It makes me feel like we're going towards a future where we're going to continue to see a pattern where there are crises that are created intentionally so they can step in and go, well, this is a problem, we can offer you a solution, but you're going to have to be willing to make a sacrifice. Saturn on the ascendant. Moon sextile Mercury is just, I think also this can talk more so about observations and observing how people respond to trauma, or how people respond to fear, or how people respond to not having enough things. The list can go on. The moon also by sign, it does sextile the sun. And so the sun in Capricorn in the Placidus 11th house, making that sextile to the moon, seems to suggest that the goal or the emphasis here is to be able to identify new opportunities for partnerships, perhaps even new parties. I thought all along that what we were going to end up seeing is just a complete change and transformation of the United States in general, probably the birth of what may be a new party, or the fall of an existing party. And then just more of a focus on, okay, if we can't get into a system that can work, if we're constantly seeing these like stalemates taking place in Congress or also in Senate, then there needs to be either like another branch, or there needs to be like another party that comes in, especially because things are so divided that if this continues, where we're seeing election after election, that's like literally 50-50, and a lot of people are not even voting, and we're having so many issues with voters tallies and voting regulation and voting fraud. There's got to be another way, right? And so possibly the Pluto return is going to be that, but I think part of it's about getting the money out of politics. And so that's kind of interesting to me because, even though the sun sextiling the moon is great, it indicates that from the perspective of the moon, emotionally, through some of this crisis, we're able to kind of figure out, okay, who can we rely on? What can we rely on? What political figures? It's not just about politicians coming and saying, we're going to make something, we're going to make a change here. We're going to do something. It's like, no, we really need to see people who are going to be about taking action. And I think the sun in the 11th house is kind of cool because it talks about there may be new people who come online who are rebels in some way, which when you think about the founding fathers or when we had people who were sitting in Senate or Congress, 200 years ago, we had people that were making an honest wage. We had peanut farmers and we had people who, worked regular jobs and they were taking very, very, very small and reasonable salaries to be able to be a part of the government. Why? Because they were serving the people. It was not a job that they relied on. So if we look at what's happened over time where, a lot of these people who are sitting for, 10 plus years or more are becoming millionaires just working for the federal government, not really serving the little guy, we may see some people who kind of show up and decide that they want to kind of upset the apple cart a little bit and do something different. What I'm not wild about, looking at this is that even though the moon sextiles the sun, which is saying that there is going to be a change after a period of crisis, is the fact that the sun is coming into a hard angle with both Chiron and Jupiter. So the sun square Jupiter is people who are overly idealistic or optimistic about the future. Jupiter is kind of cusping on the second house, so making big promises about changes in resources. Jupiter in this chart is the ruler of the 10th house, so it's also saying it may take some of these new people to come in and basically be like, look, we need to get to work. We need to actually see change happening and really kind of pushing that because the sun square Jupiter feels a little bit larger than life. Sun ruling the 7th house of partnerships and 10th ruling, the 10th house in regards to career and fame. It's kind of saying there's probably going to be some very famous people born from this period as a result of, being able to move through some difficult times. Sun is also in a square to Chiron, which is also insinuating that it is going to highlight the fact that part of the problem or part of the pain, especially for individuals or financially, is the fact that we have people who are sitting in office that don't really necessarily understand the real true effects of what's going on financially in the world because they're not really on our level, right? They're not going through things the same way most people in average America are. So that might also be coming up, the fact that money is hurting politics. Money is hurting the relationship with the people. It's not making it easier for some of these politicians to kind of resonate and really understand what we're going through on the day-to-day. And that in many ways, it will continue if they don't kind of clear out of this. I think it's connected to just Pluto naturally being in the 2nd house too in Capricorn, that can be the downfall, that can be the corruption, right? Pluto can be corruption. Sun quincunx Mars, which is interesting. I'm going to do a video on that. That's going to be taking place on Thursday because I have a lot to say about that. But in this chart in particular, the sun, which is really the focus, so the sun in Capricorn in the 11th house, the action revolving around groups and politics and political figures, being at odds with Mars in the 4th house, right? Gemini is seen as also like the commoner. So I could see how Mars being on the IC in conjunct the Mars is basically like people being like, we're not taking this anymore, right? Because there's so much chaos going on, within the 4th house. Mars in the 4th house is people are arguing, they're fighting, there's crime, there's a lot of people moving. The IC in the 4th house placement, it's a very sensitive part of the chart. That's the most hidden part of the chart. In a natal chart, this is like the womb. So it's basically saying, like, on an internal level, in privacy, we've got all of these people that are arguing and fighting, and there's more strife, and there's a lot more just dare I say chaos. Mars retrograde in Gemini, it's chaotic. This is also the degree, or within a degree, that Mars will station when it goes direct after being retrograde. So it's about 2.5 weeks after the Pluto return, but still, like, Mars is definitely making itself known here. And when a planet inconjuncts or quincunx is another one, it basically is like an itch that you cannot scratch. Both of them are irritating each other. They don't know how to reconcile. So the sun can be seen as the king. It can also be seen as alliances. It can also be seen as just political figures at odds with the people when it comes to fourth house related matters, right? Gemini is communication. Mars is about movement, but it's also about cutting and severing, people tearing themselves apart. The sun is watching this happen. And yeah, they're in an inconjunct. They're trying to reconcile with each other. What's also interesting, and I'll talk about this in the video on Thursday, is that this sextile between the South Node and the Sun, forming a yod to Mars. So Mars is very much an emphasis in this chart. And Mars does, by sign, trine the ascendant and Saturn. It also does form the sextile to Chiron. So it's saying, like, through financial hardship or wounds in regards to an individual level and enough people getting angry. I mean, man, you're hearing stuff like, you know, Walmart is taking stuff off of the store's shelves in some areas, or you have to call an associate for stuff because so much stuff is being stolen as a result of what's going on economically with inflation, and also people who are getting really desperate, and there's, you know, higher rate of crimes. This is all kind of like Mars related things. And if enough of this stuff happens, it's going to create enough conflict where, yeah, it can be a civil war. I don't like using that term, but it can be a civil war. But it's the people tearing themselves apart, Mars in the fourth, also square the moon, which is giving them the opportunity or the ability to be like, okay, you know, now we need to hash this out in a public way because, you know, people aren't behaving, or they're not, you know, kind of backing down, and now we have to take things into our own hands. And this is a dangerous thing, because that's really, the more that I look at the aspects both with this chart and also through the Mercury retrograde, when Mercury and Mars both are stationing, they're also going to create this same yod. So it's all focusing as the main player as being Mars and Gemini, which is basically like, how are we as a collective, not just in the United States, this is in the world, but in the United States too, manipulating and changing vocabulary on like a dictionary level to be able to justify some of the actions that the government is taking, right? And so it's like, if enough people get angry and they say something and they start pushing back, you're going to see them start pushing and kind of changing the narrative and changing the rules or the vocabulary of things to justify their response to people, right? Just so you guys know. All right, so I could go on and on and on and on and on about this, but know that this is going to take a very long time. I would anticipate, you know, right now Saturn is hovering around this degree. So as Saturn is coming into conjunction with this 23 degrees ascendant, we're going to start seeing the effects of things getting a little bit more stern or kind of limited, or a lot more like icy when it comes to how, you know, people are viewing the United States in general, or how certain governments also in the world are treating the United States. A lot of our Mars return mirrors a lot of this stuff as well. Let's compare this to the natal chart. This is something I like to do with returns in general. So sometimes I'll do a comparison to the natal chart. So on the outside, no, I take that back. On the inside is the US natal. On the outside is the Pluto return. Okay, so we'll flip this, see what I'm saying? All right. So looking at the transits on the outer wheel, this is when the Pluto return happened on December 28th, 2022. You guys want to get into the habit, if you're starting to learn about astrology and you want to compare solar returns, looking at the solar return and the natal, just flipping the two is a really easy technique that you can kind of start to see some of the other layers in regards to the return and what it's bringing up. So outside of Pluto having its return, we also have Mercury that was really close to Pluto. Does that look familiar to you guys? The Mercury retrograde in Capricorn is going to be, it was retrograding right around this degree. That would suggest through the retrograde that information was coming out. They were going to put some information out. They pivoted, they stopped, they went back, they're reflecting. So they're holding back on releasing some financial information. Likely, we're going to find out more in the second half of January into February that things are a lot worse financially in the United States than people are letting on. I think we're already in a recession. I think that we may be heading towards a depression, honestly, in 2024. Looking at some of these aspects in the chart, people think I'm crazy. I'm not a financial analysis. It's not what I do, but something about this makes me feel like the real rumbles are going to start in the spring, and we're going to see the full effects of this next year. Is the United States in general as a whole trying to protect itself from this inevitable digital, CBDC revolution that's coming, right? Are they getting in bed with the big banks to ensure that they're still going to be kind of like the world leader? Do they have issues? Yeah, they do. Between their Mars return and the Mars quincunx Pluto, I'm watching some stuff that's coming out about like Russia and China and like them teaming up and basically trying to find ways to incentivize business and exchange, especially when it comes to like oil exchange in the Middle East, by using other currencies as a way to start combating the US having as much power as they have with US dollar. So yeah, just interesting stuff. The Mercury retrograde is definitely holding a lot of this stuff back. I would anticipate as Mercury comes to about 27 degrees, right around the time of the heels of the new moon in Aquarius, you guys will see, we'll have like Mercury coming around there. Pluto is going to receive a conjunction, not just from Mercury, but also the sun and the moon. And then we go into the new moon. So right during the balsamic period, days leading up to the new moon, there's probably going to be some kind of statement from the Fed or from, some major statement about the United States and the reality of the financial situation. But we're not going to see more of that until the summer. Okay, so we've got this conjunction, which is basically saying, once again, an intercepted Mercury, that there's some information that's not entirely too clear, or a changing of direction with where US, finances are going. We've also got Saturn in this chart that's approaching the IC. So over these next few weeks, Saturn's going to come into conjunction, it's on the cusp of the third house. It's coming into conjunction with the third house, which is going to, once again, limit. When we think of Saturn, we think of boundaries, limitations, walls, setbacks, anything in regards to that, in regards to third house stuff, okay? So the third house is getting around, going places, communications, phone, the internet, if in Aquarius. And I feel like there may be some push to limit the rights of the use of the internet, maybe social media. We might see this happen more like on a city or state level. It may not immediately be like federally, especially within the first, the first bit of its transit in the third house. And as Saturn approaches the third house, we're also going to see that it's coming into, it's coming out of a trine with Mars. So this has also been about like how in the media we're spinning our relationship with other countries and like who our allies are and like who we might have beef with. And we're going to see finally Saturn's going to come into conjunction with the moon. And then it's going to start trining our sun and our Jupiter the next few years. But that's a heavier one. When Saturn went retrograde over the last 2 years, it did not reach these degrees. So now that Saturn's coming up to 26, 27 degrees, it's going to come into conjunction with our moon. Now, in the US chart, the moon is the ruler of the 8th house, which is about secrets, death, taxes. It's about joint resources. It's about investments. So just looking at this by transit, because Saturn rules money and it rules communication, or it rules documents or the media, it's basically saying people are going to get really emotionally beat down, or they're going to feel depressed, or they're going to feel scared as a result of what's going on, because they're going to realize that it's harder and harder to do 8th house Cancer things. It's going to be harder to get mortgages. It's going to be harder to pay off debt. It's going to be much more challenging. Also, when it comes to being able to communicate and express things, The moon is the public though, so I could see that like in a public sense, there's going to be more harsh criticism, right, of what's going on with taxes and banking. But it's going to be, yeah, it's going to be very taxing emotionally. Now, the moon can also rule women and anything in regards to just like femininity. So we may find also that there's just going to be like much more challenge when it comes to talking about reproductive rights, women's rights, things of that nature. I think of like what I like about the US chart is the moon in Aquarius in the 3rd house is just very chatty. There's a lot of information. Obviously, we're like a big country for like media, right? So if you think of like, you know, the TV shows, the movies, everything that has really kind of, especially put certain parts of the United States like on the map in the entertainment industry, Saturn coming into conjunction may kind of suggest that now there is like a need to cut back or make changes or let go. There may be a sense of certain people being let go for financial reasons within these companies, but there may also be a sense of this push to basically be like, look, you need to carry out this narrative. You need to say this thing. This is what we want, you know, the message being portrayed. If you're not willing to do that, then there's the door. So we may see more people who are resigning or actually leaving when it comes to the media. Looking at this also like in traditional astrology, you know, the 4th house was about the endings of situations, right? Ruled by the moon. And the moon can represent personalities and people that are on, you know, like, you know, your local news channels and all of this stuff. Saturn also represented like the last line. It was like the traditional astrologers, Pluto, right? Now we have Pluto, so we know how Pluto works. Pluto's not anywhere near Aquarius going into conjunction with our Aquarius moon. However, Saturn is coming into conjunction with the moon, okay? Just this is astrology, and I have to bring this up because this is the stuff that's coming up. I can't tell you guys how many videos I'm seeing floating around on the internet of just like newscasters that are giving a presentation and then all of a sudden they just stop and they collapse, right? So in this chart, the moon represents the 8th house, which is death. We have Mercury in this house, which can be anything in regards to the public image, or it can be about communication. It is intercepted through Virgo. And we see Pluto that is still in opposition to Mercury. Okay, so people who don't go along with the narrative, they don't want to be talking about certain things. They go on an interview and they're talking about, you know, exposing some truth and they get cut off. Okay, that's kind of, I think, the Pluto-Mercury opposition. But I'm watching Saturn come into conjunction with the moon, and I'm wondering if this is going to materialize as enough people who are working for certain media stations being told, like, get with the program or get lost, that basically rebel and they go against their fears in regards to not having a paycheck or not getting funding. And they're like, we're gonna go and start our own thing. We're gonna become independent, or we're gonna start a podcast, or we're gonna, you know, write a blog, whatever. But the moon Saturn transit in general, heavier moods, right? So we're gonna experience that for really the next couple of months until Saturn gets into Pisces. Something else that I'm noticing also is that in this particular chart, the United States was having, during the Pluto return, Mars in conjunction to Uranus, which I interpret as rather explosive, okay? So literally Mars is things that are powerful or that are heated or angry or sharp, but this is word, so it's Gemini. And then the conjunction to Uranus in the 7th house, explosive, secret things, Mars rules the 12th house, being exposed like documents through social media, Gemini, or through the public, you know, opinion, 7th house, that's been aided by Uranian people. Uranus rules the 3rd. Guys, all of the stuff that's been coming out on Twitter, some of the crazy things that are being exposed on TikTok that you guys might consider to be conspiracy theorists. I'm not saying it's all true, but some of this stuff is like radical stuff that's like being brought up by the public and being asked about is definitely very much being highlighted here. And you'll see this more when I do the video on Thursday, but something that really kind of piqued my interest was the fact that when Mars goes direct in Gemini, after months of being in Gemini, and since the end of October, it's been retrograde, When it goes direct, it will be conjunct America's Uranus on the along the 7th house. It's at an 8, which deals with death, and it deals with things that are hidden, or things that are going to be exposed, or things that can be more sinister. And it is also going to in conjunct Mercury, which will also be at an 8. So these planets all going direct. I'm telling you guys, 2023 is going to be the year of exposure of a lot of things, and disclosure. We're going to have a lot of disclosure on stuff that people were not really aware of. I have a feeling that it's going to start over the next month, but we're not going to hear more about this until closer to after the Mars square Neptune in March. And as this activates, this Mars, which rules the 12th house of hidden enemies, subconscious dealings behind closed doors, and Mars also has connections to the 4th and the 5th house. It's interesting that there is some secret information, Mars and Gemini, that's being exposed about 4th and 5th house, about entertainers, about children, about younger people, about maybe younger people being involved through media as exposing some of these issues, right? Especially with like 8th house or 8 degrees, corruption, death, scandal. And yeah, people possibly being fearful of bringing some of this stuff up in a public arena. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff going on here. Beyond that, let's see what else. Mercury trine Neptune. So that's okay. I mean, I feel like that's still, trines aren't always a good thing. That can definitely bring some information up that we're still feeling out or feeling our way through. I think Ceres conjunct the midheaven is interesting because Ceres is an asteroid that's associated with nurturing and mothering. But it's also about separation, grief, loss. And can't quite take my eyes off of the fact that we've got Jupiter conjunct the IC, and this is important considering this is a Jupiter-based chart. So it's expanding Aries energy in the 4th house, expanding the military, expanding homes, expanding and traveling to other areas. I think you're going to see a lot of people that are going to be leaving the cities. I think you're going to see a lot of people who are also, as a result of this opposition to Ceres, reflecting on the past and what America used to be like versus what it's like now. But I see the Ceres-Jupiter opposition as a separation of home and family and relationships, division. Not just like marital, it can be because Jupiter and Ceres are, Jupiter and Juno are husband and wife, but Jupiter in opposition to Ceres makes me feel like the separation of family. So everything that's just happened the last few years with the pandemic and, people not having the same opinions about health-related matters and how that kind of crossed into politics, I think that this is going to shine a light on the fact that we still have a lot of people who are kind of, separate and at odds. All right, so that's kind of just taking a look at that. But when we flip this around, and this is really interesting, putting the US natal chart on the outside, and then putting the the Pluto return that we just looked at on the inside. Notice a couple of things here where planets return to angles, and we're looking at some of the same conjunctions. So the US moon and Pallas Athena, which I think that's what really contributes to, Americans being like, yeah, that's what we do. You protect or you stand. Like there's like a sense of pride. That to me is very Moon Pallas. But the fact that, that sits on the ascendant and Saturn is conjunct, it makes me feel like it's once again limiting the people, right? And also in a way, it can be like, well, what do you emotionally commit to, or what are you willing to do for the people, willing to do for your country? What are you willing to sacrifice, right? Traditionally, in the 7th house, we see the US, Uranus at 8 degrees it's on the cusp of the 7th house. It's in the 6th. But we see when we lay this on top, it's once again conjunct the IC. So remember how I said to you guys, Mars on the IC, to me, seems very combative. It seems very confrontational. It seems like it's like almost like a civil war that's kind of brewing. And now we have Uranus here. So it is saying that, when these degrees get activated through outer planets or, retrogrades, we're going to see this kind of come back up. So it can be a war on the people, it can be a war on the media, it can be, you know, conflicts or like separation of homes and spaces. This is down the road, but I've thought like when Jupiter goes into Gemini in a couple years, and when the US has our Uranus return, and when Saturn gets into Gemini, I don't feel like the United States are going to be the United States anymore. I think they're going to be separate territories. It's going to be similar to Europe. You may have certain states that band together because it's going to make sense economically for them to do so, or they may be more in alliance and have allegiance to each other as a result of some of their like political, you know, affiliation. So you may see certain districts, right? Very like, what's that movie? What's the movie with the mockingbird or the mockingjay or whatever? With all the different districts where they're, you know, fighting against each other, and somebody's like, you know, I choose to go. I'm drawing a blank, but you guys get what I'm saying. That's what this reminds me of. Going into the future. I think the moon on the ascendant is emotional, it's changeable, it's very sensitive. I think that Uranus and Mars conjunct the fourth house seems to symbolize that there is going to be a total changing or blowing up of something in regards to the homeland. And that south node sitting relatively close to Pluto, right? And then we've got the north node that's in the 6th house ruled by the sun, and the sun is in the 11th house. That it is kind of saying there's like a reorganization of, you know, political groups, possibly stuff in regards to also health and wellness. And I think that we're going to also start realizing that, you know, we have a real issue with health in the United States, just not having systems in place to ensure that people have proper health care, and that we're doing what we need to do to also ensure that people are educated about health. I think that Mercury retrograde in this house conjunct the 6th house cusp can also talk about mental health issues and housing issues and issues in regards to, you know, children and families. And notice that it's in opposition naturally, because this is what we see because of the US chart. It's naturally in opposition to Pluto, but it's hitting that Pluto return opposition with Mercury also and Pluto. So I think there's this realization that, you know, where they can control behind the scenes is through the 6th house. It's, do you have food? Do you have somewhere to live? Do you have somewhere to eat? You know, that kind of stuff. All coming into squares big time with Chiron in the 2nd. So that's the focal point of the T-square, where it's like the money that's going to be made is, okay, well, we'll sell you, you know, we'll sell you on this service, or we'll sell you more prescriptions, or we'll, you know, control what's going on with like food and with housing, and we'll give you support, but at what cost, right? So that's the Pluto return. Let's look briefly at the Mars return. Once again, there were several of them. So looks like we had one October 4th, 2022, November 23rd, 2022. That's when it went retrograde. And I'm gonna look at the final one, which will be March 6th, 2023. And as you guys know, it's always in the 7th house at 21 degrees. So this is going to be the final of 3 Mars returns. Really important because this is an Aries ruled chart, so that's interesting. 12 degrees Aries rising. So still dealing with that energy of what's hidden, psychic, private, can talk about hospitals, can talk about hidden enemies, things that are invisible. And Mars returns, so it's at 21 degrees, and it's in the 3rd house. So 21 deals with growth, it deals with education, travel, it can deal with airplanes, going to places, teaching things, even stuff about like philosophy or like legal related stuff comes with that. So Mars sitting in the 3rd house for a Mars chart is like having the guts to say something, to take action, to send the letter, make the phone call, to, you know, get in the car, go somewhere, right? And Mars has a lot of aspects in this chart. So it does make sextiles roughly to the ascendant and Jupiter and Chiron. So I see as like Jupiter and Chiron sitting on the ascendant sextiling is going to be more about people speaking out, because Jupiter is about expansion of knowledge and Aries is the body and the physical kind of like demeanor. And Chiron is talking about anything in regards to injuries or wounds. The sextile to Mars, I think, is people speaking out on social media, people going and speaking out like, locally, you know, in their local political, you know, groups, going and getting involved in your communities and talking about problems and voicing your problems and sending emails to your senators or, you know, calling representatives and being like, hey, you know, this is affecting me. I can't help but look at, you know, Jupiter Chiron within a degree away, which talks about a healing crisis, an awareness and an opening of a wound on a personal level. So this may be about people who have served, veterans, also just individuals who have sustained some kind of an injury of some kind and they want to talk about it, write about it, post about it. Mars is also forming a square to Neptune and roughly the sun. And so you'll see that through March as the sun and Mercury and Neptune are coming together in the later degrees of Pisces. They will be forming a really confusing square to Neptune. So there is like a sense of holding something back and not letting something kind of come out in the media. And Mars can be soldiers, it can be athletes, it can be young men, it can be children. This is also things in regards to elementary schools, younger individuals, people who are, you know, kind of up to the teens in terms of age. And this is also about neighbors. So it's interesting that, you know, Mars is forming an opening square to Neptune where it's like, yes, people want to speak out and they want to say things, but there's some sense of being like, oh, should I say something? You know, should I tell somebody about how I feel, what direction this country is going in? Should I say something about the fact that I sustained an injury from a mandate? Do I come out with my story? There is a sense of cloudiness. There's going to be a lot of cloudiness in mid-March. It's going to be hard to kind of see some of these things fully coming through. Mars returns happen about every 2 years, so this isn't as long-standing necessarily as the Pluto return chart, so this is just kind of the energy in the skies for the better part of the next 2 years. But still, just such strong energy in the 12th house, Saturn, Mercury, the Sun, and Neptune. And Mars and Saturn are in a trine, so that I like. It's loose, it's about 8 degrees, but that does seem to suggest that when it comes to government and officials and those who are responsible, you know, possibly being able to take more action or being able to say more, being able to speak out more, but this may not be until we see some significant transits happening in Gemini. So it may be May, June-ish, you know, it may take up until the time closer to 2025 as we're seeing, you know, Jupiter go into Gemini and start making some of those, actually 2024 and 2025, as Jupiter goes into Gemini and it starts activating this, that we start seeing more information kind of coming out. I'm not wild about this presence of so many planets in the 12th house, right? You know, Mercury being information, communication, the mind, the sun, energy, drive, you know, dedication, Neptune, dissolving, things that are hidden. That talks about mental health issues, you know, private prisons, private centers, camps. The sun is the ruler of the 6th house. So this is doctors, healers, specialists, you know, things going and kind of wrapping up or going to rest or being hidden. So what information in regards to these topics is being hidden? Is being suppressed, right? By what? Saturn. Saturn is conjunct all of this. And Saturn is also the one trining Mars, saying, no, we need some more time to kind of figure this out before we decide, you know, how we're going to spin this. Comes some major transits in Gemini. Obviously, you know, moon's in Virgo, so what we're going to see within a day or two of the Mars return. So I'm really looking at mid-March for a number of reasons. You know, if you guys saw my 2023 video where I talk about all the big transits of the year, March is really where things are like, holy cow, what's going on? Like a big plot twist, and there's going to be more like fear porn out there. And then the new year begins And we see the sun go into Aries and Jupiter's in Aries, and then we're gonna have a solar eclipse in April. So fresh, new, different energy, which is like about taking a stand and taking initiative, which will be in March and April. So this is still kind of like swimming through the fog, trying to figure out, which end is up. Okay, so we talked about all the return dates. We talked about the Mars return. I talked to you guys a little bit about the Saturn transit the moon and just like the lower kind of vibes of the people, especially at 27. I think it's going to be a lot of like, oh, we can't talk about that or we can't disclose that. So I think it's going to bring up more in regards to like the Freedom of Information Acts and people wanting to request information or documents or data. I also think Saturn coming into conjunction with Pallas and the moon is definitely going to throw the housing market for a loop, because this talks about collectively how people are feeling about their homes, and Saturn can be a depression. And as Saturn comes into that and it depresses and it eliminates people's ability to get more out of their home, more money out of their home. So we're going to probably see that there's going to be some more economic issues, which is going to affect people, especially people who have taken loans, mortgages, right? 8th house. So banking and resources. So it may be harder for people to get loans. It may be harder for people to pay off loans. We might see actual losses, which is also the 8th house. Of people being like, I took a loan out for this house that was $500,000 and I paid crazy, interest on it. And now the market's breaking down and now I owe way more on my house than what it's worth. There's going to be some serious stuff like this that's going to start happening. The Saturn moon conjunction is part of it, but also because Saturn is going to in conjunct Mercury in the process. So it's going to be, oh, you didn't tell me this. I didn't know there was this clause. Yeah, it's read the fine print, guys. When it comes to buying cars, 3rd and 4th house can be seen as vehicles depending on what system you use. When it comes to signing leases, stuff like that, I think Saturn coming into conjunction with the moon is we're going to see more people opting to live in vehicles, to travel and have freedom to kind of move around and relocate. We're going to see larger numbers of people living in apartments and complexes, and we're also going to see larger numbers of people who aren't going to be able to afford to live where they've been living, so they're going to be having to live with others. So we're going to see more people kind of like living together in much more of a communal type style, basically. Difficult stuff. That Saturn moon conjunction is going to happen pretty much from right around February 11th. And this is really what I'm watching, is going to be on the 17th when Saturn and the sun are together. The moon conjuncts Pluto in the US chart. And then right here, February 19th-ish, because Saturn's on the moon and it's a balsamic moon. So the next 2 balsamic periods, right before the new moon a couple days before Aquarius, the new moon a couple days before Pisces, that is when we're going to hear more information about kind of the breakdown that's going on, I think, with the economy, the breakdown that's going on with, federal budgeting and spending, and also anything in regards to issues in regards to the housing market. Long term, right? I've seen more of the downward trend as like the full breakdown. Like if you're somebody who's like, well, when do I buy a house? Well, you don't want to buy a house right now. You want to wait. We're going to see what's going to play out with Pluto square the nodes and the Venus retrograde, which is going to square Jupiter, Uranus. For a lot of people, that sweet spot's going to start right around August of this year. But still, if we look further out, for me, like 2026, 2027, these are bigger challenges economically in the world. So that may also be times for people to be able to kind of have more purchasing power. But I think the big issue here is going to be people having crisis paying their debt, paying loans. And so education loans is another thing. I'm wondering, is there going to be a reversal? Is there going to be a backtrack, that there isn't going to be a continuation of support or a forgiveness for some college loans? I'm not as optimistic. We'll see. Another topic I wanted to look at really quickly also is going to be the nodal square. So the north and the south node are going to be changing here over the summer. And even though the Pluto return is over, right? Pluto will retrograde back in conjunction within about a degree to the 27 degree Pluto. But what I'm looking at is when the North and the South node go into Aries and Libra, we're going to see the nodes square Pluto, right? Right here. And so for everybody in the world, the nodes will square Pluto. So you got to know where Capricorn is in your chart, because Pluto's like not going down without a fight. It's going to have like its like death rattle right at the end, you know, before the change happens. But Pluto will square the nodes. And that basically means that in the US chart, because Pluto is about what is unexpected, or it's about hidden war or wars in other country, or anything in regards to hidden enemies, with the North and the South node square Pluto, it's saying, number one, the US is cruising for an economic rumble. Like there's going to be something big that's going to kind of come up that's going to be like, oh my God, this thing happened, which affects everybody. Keep in mind, it's still in opposition to Mercury and Cancer, which is about loans and anything in regards to homes. But I personally believe, because of Pluto's affiliation with the 12th house Mars, which is hidden or private or secret foreign wars, that they're going to blame the war in Ukraine on a lot of what is about to come. They're basically going to be like, well, it was the war in Ukraine and this was all like Russia's fault and they did this to us, and like now we're in this like economic recession, and nobody really wants to kind of tell people that it has the potential to be like the Greater Depression. Like it does, looking at this chart. Okay, so the nodes are going to square. It's at 28, which is a home degree. It's a Cancer degree. So it's talking a lot about what's changing and transforming about the homeland, about home and property, about ownership, about rights in regards to ownership, home taxes, stuff like that. That's going to be taking place in July of 2023. And that's going to be felt until it comes out of the square. So until about August, right? That's why I said August. That's when we start to see things open up. Simultaneously, at the same time, we also start to see we start to see Chiron coming within range of the Chiron return. Chiron return in Aries in the 4th house, pain and healing and the need to heal on an individual level when it comes to home, family, roots, resources. And it will oppose still our natal Saturn. So the harsh reality that, you know, this is not necessarily a country that is still kind of like, buy a house, get married, have kids. Like that's like the Saturn-Juno opposed Chiron, that there are periods where there is an emphasis on relationship and unity and like the American dream. And then there's the reality that's like, actually, it leaves you feeling like alone and overworked and alienated and even more kind of bankrupt emotionally. With that Chiron in opposition to Saturn. And I say that because it has connections, Saturn has connections with the 2nd house. So where we have become so focused on, you know, consuming or owning or having something, that actually we're kind of falling short of like what we need on a personal level. Before that even happens, I guess I should have said this to you guys first, but something else that's going to present a bit of a turning point, and this won't be as loud, but it's still there. And we're going to see this going into February, is that before the nodes even change signs, they are going to come into a square with each other. So this is going to be like right around mid-February. South node goes to 6 degrees. The North node goes to 6 degrees. So what's going to happen is that they are going to square the nodes of fate. So we call this just like a nodal square. All right. So this is like a lot of needing to make changes, being at a crossroads, not knowing how to make these changes, feeling the pressure and being like, well, we're in this situation, we don't know how to change it. In my opinion, it's interesting that this happens right before the nodes square Pluto. So it's like there's things coming up in February from a political perspective, and also from an entertainment perspective, a creative perspective, especially things in regards to like investments, taking chances, the stock market, that's like Uranus, you know, Taurus 5th house, children, things in regards to the nervous system and the health of children that are coming up in February that need to be acknowledged, because it's going to play a bigger role. This is probably more so the stock market, honestly. It's going to play a bigger role in whatever this is that's going to break down when the nodes then square Pluto and reinforce the Pluto return, which will be in July and August. So stuff that's going on the next couple of months basically is setting us up for the bigger holy shift moment that's going to take place over the summer. And last but not least, I'm also looking at the eclipses, which are very much going to be activating the US chart in a very big way. Probably the bigger one is going to be, there we go, the the Aries eclipse. So we have on April 19th, 2023, a solar eclipse in Aries. Some people have said some stuff about this. I don't understand the back and forth. It is a solar eclipse in Aries, okay? I've heard enough of this to make a statement. It is a solar eclipse in Aries. The reason being is it's within range of the North Node. So the moment, literally the very moment that the moon and the sun come in together, this will be a total solar eclipse. Go look at your ephemeris. I'm not going to argue this with people because there's somebody who keeps making a comment on it. It's driving me nuts. This is a solar eclipse. And it is a solar eclipse because they are conjunct and it's within a 5-degree range of the North Node. Go back and look at the eclipse that happened in the fall of 2020. There was a lunar eclipse in Taurus and it was within range of the North Node in Gemini. These eclipses are possible, trust me. Ask any other astrologer, they're going to tell you this is a solar eclipse. So this is a solar eclipse that's going to be in Aries. 29 degrees, which does represent a crisis point or a turning point. It's a black moon, so we're going to have a new moon at 0 degrees, a new moon at 29 degrees. That one will be the solar eclipse. Yeah, March and April is going to be lit. But this is reinforcing Mars. And at the time of this eclipse, Mars is conjunct within minutes of the US sun. This seems to suggest the possibility of the US within this cycle. So it could be within a month, it could be within 6 months of this eclipse, possibly talking about going to war. And you would see this anyway because of the Sabian symbol associated with this and the degrees and the fact that this is going to square Pluto. So it's kind of saying like, hey, we have to act, we have to do this thing because we have to protect our resources. So it may not just be we have to protect our money or we have to protect our land. It might mean we have to protect our oil, we have to protect our investments. There's going to be something that they're going to use as a reason to get involved. And you know, Mars being the ruler, which is debilitated in Cancer, sits on the sun. So it's basically saying like, yeah, this is a big moment for the United States with this particular eclipse. You may not see it immediately. You may not see it until like the sun reactivates that eclipse over the summertime, but still it's bringing up the same pattern that I'm seeing. That's like June, July. That's when things really start to kind of heat up. And so the sun will reactivate that somewhere around 4th of July. So that'll be the next solar return chart that we're going to look at. But what's interesting is we're going to have a solar return round about the time also we see the moon coming into conjunction with the lunar return. So it looks like it's going to be somewhere around here. And then the other one that I was looking at that kind of caught my eye. Oh, and Mars is going to be conjunct Lilith and it's going to oppose the moon. I mean, it's like it's setting this up in so many ways for there just to be a lot of conflict in this next year. The next eclipse will be October 28th. And this one's also going to reinforce the square of the nodes. So this will be a lunar eclipse in Taurus. Not too bad, actually. It's conjunct Jupiter, exalted moon. But it's going to be in opposition to Mars, okay? And the nodes are still reinforcing with that square to Pluto. It's still happening. So we're feeling it. It's easing up, but we're feeling it. And the eclipse itself, because it's going to be around 5 degrees, is going to square the nodes, right? Because the nodes of fate are at 6. So when you have the moon square its own nodes, and you're going to have the moon that's going to make an opposition to Mars. And the nodes, by the way, the sun is the ruler of the North Node, which is squaring. And then you have the Uranus being the ruler of the South Node, or Saturn, conjunct the moon, right? Uranus in opposition to Mars. I have a feeling, especially because Biden's a Scorpio I believe. I think he's a Scorpio sun, 12th house. I think he's Sag rising with 12th house Scorpio sun. I'm wondering, because this is also, I believe, very close to his moon, if I remember correctly, if this is an indication that like Biden is no longer in office come fall of next year. That's another thing that I have. I want to look more at his chart before I make any serious predictions, but I have a feeling that might be the case because the eclipse is a full moon eclipse. It's going to oppose the sun, which is the king, and also because we're seeing it square the nodes, that there is some major changes in terms of what's going on with politics and money and the markets and stuff like that. So we'll do more on that once we get closer to that point. Usually I touch on this when we have the return. Maybe we'll take a look at the returns closer to March when we have the third Mars return. But if I don't, then I'll come back and I'll talk to you guys probably about this more so when we get closer to the 4th of July, because that looks like it's going to be an interesting solar return if we're having a lunar return right around the same time. America's kind of coming back to the same energy it had when it was born. All right, well, thank you for letting me have my playtime of being able to kind of dissect this and kind of look at some of what's coming. I'm interested to come back to this video and see kind of like what plays out over the next 6 to 8 months and what's kind of happening. But keep in mind, it's really going to be until Pluto leaves Capricorn, and it needs to get out of this range of 27 degrees. And when it does, it's going to go off with a bang, because we're going to see this conjunction here, right? In February of 2024, Pluto is going to leave. It'll still come back into Capricorn a couple more times. So it'll hang out there for a little bit and then it'll bounce. So it won't really be until the end of 2024 that we're really feeling the effects of the Pluto return ending. And even then we've got Pluto coming for our south node. I know that that's way into the future, but that is going to be something that's going to be setting up. And personally, I think 2026 and 2027, because we're going to be seeing Pluto's on the south node, we're going to have a reverse nodal return when it comes to money and resources. And we're also having our Uranus return. These are the years where we're restructuring both financially, but also like internally on a federal level. And I do think that the United States still will separate. That's just what I think. But yeah, let me know your thoughts if you found this as interesting as I did. And leave me your comments below. I'll be back on Thursday. We're going to talk all about why the Mars-Mercury stationing is so important. I have a really interesting kind of conversation, or I guess like lecture, that I'm going to be having with you guys about this war on words and why this Mercury retrograde is really reinforcing the Mars retrograde and what it means for each and every one of the 12 signs. Until next time, I will see all of you guys very soon. Enjoy the rest of your week. Take care.